going to now kick off our first speaker of the night. And let me introduce him real quick to you all. He's basically a visionary branding creative whom I've known and worked with for a number of years now. Nate has worked on some of the most recognizable brands in the world and the most iconic events, which we're going to be talking about in great length with that. He's a true expert in blending creativity and strategy to make an impact, and we're really excited to hear his insights here tonight. So with further ado, let's introduce Nate Morley. All right.
What's up?
So as some of you that were here last time, our conversations are going to be very casual, but we're going to definitely dive deep into understanding the past and the experiences that kind of led up to now and talking about some of the work that Nate has worked on. So with that, let's start right into it, okay?
Let's do it.
All right. So you began your career in advertising at a small agency in Minneapolis, working with over 200 Target commercials.
I really hit the jackpot. My very first job in advertising, this tiny little agency in Minneapolis reached out. I grew up in Utah, so I had no ties to that area, and was fortunate enough to go to this small agency who was doing all of Target's advertising at the time. And actually, for a time, I was the only copywriter in the building. I came up as a copywriter. And so I got thrown in so many different projects. And by the time I'd left that spot about 4 years later, I produced over kind of 400 or 200 Target commercials. And that was back in the day of, kind of this firm invented sort of red and white bullseyes and the Target dog and all that good stuff. So I got thrown in the fire right away.
And then you moved on to work at Deutsch.
Yeah, I moved out to LA to work as a group creative director at Deutsch, Los Angeles, and was happy to come out here.
And those early experiences, how did they shape your approach to creativity and brand storytelling?
I think more than anything, it was just, when you're kind of coming up in the business and looking around and just being surrounded by unbelievably smart people and creative people. And I think the thing, I especially learned from those early days was to kind of not settle. Because, when you're young, it's like that first idea is like, it's so precious. It's like, I just had the best idea of all time and I don't want to let it go. And then someone says, actually, that idea is not that great. And the tendency, I think, when you're just starting out is to be like, you have this precious little thing you want to take care of. And I think what I learned early on was always keep push for more. And there's, you got to come up with 1,000 ideas, not just one.
That's great. And then in 27, you transitioned from advertising agency to the brand side, taking on the role of SVP of global marketing and creative at DC Shoes, where you led some of the biggest initiatives, including the most successful series, Gymkhana. And then from there, you moved on to Skullcandy, which BG, I saw he's here
Shout out
tonight,
BG.
Leading all their global marketing and creative, and you worked on a variety of channels and categories there. So in those roles, how did that shape your understanding of the cultural impact and brand engagement?
Yeah, I think so. I kind of come up in advertising and I loved it and I was having a lot of success. I had a lot of momentum in advertising, but I didn't want to just be limited to being like the ad guy.
Yeah.
And so that's when the opportunity to work at DC came up. Having kind of grown up, snowboarding, skateboarding, that kind of stuff, and just having, a lot of love for the world that DC sort of inhabited, jumped at the chance to kind of expand, not only continue to build on, the creative side, but also learn strategy and product and go to market and those kind of things. So I wanted to kind of, expand my sort of capability and experience. You mentioned Gymkhana and some other things. I don't know. Some people here probably know what Gymkhana is. I'm sure a lot of students probably have no idea what Gymkhana is, but the Gymkhana films were these amazing projects. I got to work with Ken Block, who's the founder of DC Shoes at the time, and we got to work on the first 4 Gymkhana films together. And I think the thing that I learned about that was, one of the challenges we had at DC was a lot of people knew who we were or recognized the brand, but didn't necessarily have a strong connection to it. And we didn't have, big budgets or anything like that. So what was cool about, stuff like the Gymkhana films back in the day was it was a way for us to transcend our core audience and those who knew about us and widen our audience and without having to spend a lot of money to do it. And, of course, Ken became a legend in these films. I think the Gymkhana series in total has probably got over 1 billion views. It's insane.
Yeah, and then you went over to Skullcandy and did almost something similar over there with that products.
Yeah, I worked as a CMO at Skullcandy for a couple of years, and very, very different industry. So now you're in consumer electronics, and a lot of opportunities and challenges there. But I think both at at DC and Skullcandy, one of the things you learn very quickly is how much culture matters, and that you don't want to be a taker from culture, but you want to be a contributor and an amplifier of culture. And I think those are lessons you learn pretty quickly when you're kind of working in this world a little bit, where so many companies, they want to leverage, surf culture, skate, or like whatever the thing is. It could be gaming culture, it could be car culture, it could be whatever. Brands oftentimes want to borrow from or take from those cultures. And I think one of the lessons I learned is like, don't be a taker, be an amplifier and a giver and a contributor.
That's great. And then you made even a bigger move, and you went over to work at Nike, running the global director of brand marketing for a category that's a little different than what you had worked on in the past.
Yeah, running. Yeah, so the running category, but again, same lesson, right? Like running, there's running culture. And so you want to, tap into that and be authentic to that, and not be a taker from or try to leverage that culture, but to build on it and amplify it.
And then how was that like connecting to a much bigger global audience working with them?
Yeah, it's interesting because running's at the time was, and I'm sure it is now too, the biggest category at Nike. So just as a business unit, it was, the number one sort of business unit. And of course, a very small percentage of people who buy and wear Nike running shoes are actually running in them. And so it's mostly, grandpas at Disneyland and kids and everyone in between. But yeah, so, how do you stay core to that, stay true to that sort of core audience? And actually the ethos of Nike began in running, of course. And so how do you sort of, at the time, all of their innovation came from running, and then would go into other categories. So whether it was air or flying it or whatever it was, started in running and it would find its way into other categories. And so there was a lot of attention being paid to running at the time, and kind of what that meant for the brand overall.
Yeah. And then you moved over back into the agency side, becoming the group creative director for 72 and Sunny, and working with some amazing clients like Samsung, ESPN, Activision. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, 72 and Sunny is one of the best ad agencies in the world, even to this day. And Dane will, I'm sure, attest to this. They do a lot of great work with the NFL and so many others. And I just have so much respect for the agency that they've built, for their standard of creative. I think it's unmatched. I think they do it as well as anyone, and just feel fortunate I got to be sort of, again, in that culture where good enough is definitely not good enough. It's intense, and there's always like, go bigger, do more, strive, harder. But again, that just an amazing experience.
And then you pivoted again. I mean, already having this amazing career working with some of the best brands in the world, the biggest brands, you went and you started your own place called Works Collective. What inspired you to kind of launch your own creative agency?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I always had this idea for how you could approach creative and how you could service clients in sort of a new way. And I'd had this experience where I'd been on the agency side, and I'd been part of pitches, and I knew what that felt like and looked like in small boutique agencies and then big giant agencies as well, and knew what that was about and the good and the bad. And then had been on the brand side now in a couple CMO roles and some other roles, and I'd hired a lot of agencies. And so I'd seen what it was like on sort of both sides of the table. And with Works Collective, from the beginning, the goal was basically like, do the best work you possibly can. First and foremost, a lot of people say that, but it oftentimes, the business gets wrapped into it, or obligations or whatever. So my whole business model was stay as lean as possible, work with very small teams that are super, super senior and highly productive. And so, it's people that I would describe as like people you could never sort of hire full time. And so we create these like amazing teams of creative assassins, and we go sort of attack different projects in kind of a new way. And it started as me working personally with just a lot of different brands, and it sort of grew from there. And been fortunate enough to work with some incredible brands and, like you said, some of the biggest events in the world.
Yeah, we'll touch on that in a second. So we're showing back here, this is Fender, one of the ones you worked on.
Yeah, a couple fun, some Fender stuff, some.
And then this one was
stuff, yeah.
So this was also with the Utah Jazz and the Virgin Fest.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump into some of those events.
Let's do it.
Because this is the best part of his career that I love right now. So you got to work in creating the brand identity for probably one of the largest events in the world, the FIFA World Cup. So working on the women's side and also the upcoming one this upcoming year. What was your creative vision for this project, and what were some of the challenges that you faced bringing this to life?
Well, I definitely want to speak to that. I think maybe a little bit of background on how we even came to have this opportunity. So we started working with FIFA about 5 years ago, and the first project was to work on their gaming brand. So FIFA started, they've done gaming events called FIFA E, so we created a brand for FIFA E. And I think one of the things that we try really hard to do is, my theory is like there's a ton of people in the world who can make cool looking stuff. And there's a lot of really talented people out there, but we try to bring things and approach things from a very strategic point of view. So yes, it's going to look cool, but it also is going to be meaningful and be connected to something and come from a piece of truth or an insight. And I think we were able to show some of that on this very small sort of FIFA E project. And then we got invited to sort of pitch and be part of the pitch process for some of the larger events. First of all, the Women's World Cup for 23, and then ultimately the World Cup for 26.
So we're showing some of the branding that you did here. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this is the brand identity for the World Cup for 2026. And, when it's hard to appreciate until you kind of see it in action, just how insane these events are. Has anyone ever been to a World Cup? Or World Cup watchers? We got to go to the one in Qatar. It was incredible to see, but the viewership, I think, from the Qatar World Cup was over 4 billion. This World Cup will have more teams and go longer. It'll be held here in North America, so 16 cities across 3 countries. And it's anticipated that this event will be the largest event that's ever happened in history. So just the scale of this thing is insane, and how much people care about it. One of the challenges, actually, if you don't mind going back one real quick, one of the challenges with this brand was it's one tournament brand, but it's going to take place in 16 cities. So we essentially created a tournament brand identity, and then each one of the host cities got their own sort of version or expression of the brand identity. So if you can imagine what this process is like, you've got a client who's, the main client and global client. They're based in Zurich. We're working on the tournament brand. And then each host city has committees. So, and those committees are made up of lots of different types of people. Some of them are marketing people, or some of them are part of a, sports franchise locally, or some of them are chamber of commerce or whatever. So each committee is made up of totally different types of people, and the makeup of a group, in Monterey is different than is Seattle, is different than Toronto. And so you can imagine trying to create a brand identity where you get buy-in from all those kind of people who love their city, and they love football, and they love the fact that the World Cup's coming. And so quite a challenge. But again, that's where things like this strategic point of view come in, where you take a little bit of the sort of subjectivity of like, well, we like purple and we don't like purple. Try to take that out by way of having a really strong strategy and a vision for what you're trying to accomplish.
And this is one of the spots that you worked with them on too?
Yeah, so this is a launch film with the idea of kind of We Are 26 kind of was out there to launch the brand. Yeah.
So then you move on to the next biggest project, which I think everyone is going to be part of in one way or another, and that's the LA 28 Olympics that are coming up. That is so deeply connected to LA in every shape or form with that. How did your personal connection to the city influence your work for this project? And maybe talk a little bit about how you were able to get this project.
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. So we started working with LA 28 before FIFA. And so it's crazy, but we started working on this, I think, in 2019 on this brand identity. So that's, again, one of the challenges of, if you can imagine trying to create a brand that won't show up in the world for 9 years. 9 years later, who knows what the technology is going to be in 9 years? Who knows, all these different things. So, to your point about the connection to the city, I think one of the things that we quickly became, that was sort of the driving force behind this as a concept was, and you guys all know LA, but it's like, it's so big and so diverse in terms of its people and the industry and the topography. And you got snow on the mountains and a beach, and you've got all these different neighborhoods and languages and food and causes and things that people care about. So, the question was, well, how could any one logo represent all of what LA is? And that would be a really tough thing to do. So we kind of just asked the question, like, well, what if it wasn't one logo? What if it was a dozen or 100, or what if it 500 logos? And that's where the idea for this kind of variable A came about. And it was really fun because we got to work with, you can see some of the launch A's here. We got to work with a ton of different people that LA 28 brought to the table, some that we brought to the table, so Reese Witherspoon and Alex Morgan and Bobby Hundreds and Billie Eilish. And we got to be on Zoom calls and interview them and get to know them, and then develop, A's that we felt like might, represent them and tell their story a little bit. And
How many A's? You told me this once before. How many versions of the logo you made?
have we done?
Yeah.
I don't know, actually. It's 30 something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were telling me it was like much larger.
Well, I think by the time 28 rolls around, I'm sure there'll be many, many more that come into the mix. But I think one of the cool things about this, I think, again, going back to like the strategy is, and we were talking about this upstairs a little bit. It feels like a lot of times events like these tend to show up into communities and sort of have this like overtaking feeling. Like, we're going to show up and we're going to brand everything and take over your stadiums and shut down your traffic and do the whole thing. And it's a very sort of what you might describe like a top-down sort of approach that a lot of events like these take. And the thing we liked about this was, in working with so many different communities and causes and people and things like that, it really felt like it was kind of a bottoms-up approach. So it was coming up from the community and building that way. And that was something that, it was nice to be able to get the buy-in from so many different types of people, and as we kind of launched this thing.
Well, enjoy the logo, because you're going to be seeing it for the next 3.5 years everywhere.
Stuff out there for sure. Yeah, for sure.
All right. So throughout your career, there have been some very unexpected opportunities that arose for you that were pivotal to your success. How did these moments shape your career path and approach to brand strategy?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, I think one of the benefits of having traveled down the road a little bit is you get to look back and be like, wow, how did that happen? Or, how did I get to this place? Or how did I meet that person? And how did that door open? Or, and one thing I would just say is, I've purposely, and we kind of go back to, I was on that advertising path and then took a hard, turn into the marketing world. And so I was very proactive and purposeful in trying to diversify my kind of skill set and what I could bring to the table. But there's just so many opportunities that you don't know they're great opportunities when they're happening. And that text you send, or that person you said hi to, or that random comment you make on some Instagram, like whatever it is, you never know what is going to impact your career and the opportunities that you have. And I'll tell you one story about that real quick, where I had worked with this guy. He's amazing. He worked on all these Apple commercials. He's a super, just incredible guy. And I loved him and had a lot of respect for him. We did a lot of work together. I hadn't seen him for 6-7 years. We kind of lost touch. I was in LA. I'm driving down the street and I was using Waze, and lots of traffic, and Waze kept telling me to turn left down these little tiny streets. I think it was on like Wilshire or Olympic or something like that. And I kept going straight. So I wasn't turning left when Waze was telling me to turn left. And I did that probably 7 times. Kept going left, or kept going straight. And one of them times it kept telling me to turn left. I finally turned left down this tiny little street, and I go down a couple blocks, and there's this dude, Ben, who I was just telling you about, and he's standing outside smoking a cigarette, hanging out, and totally random. And I drove past, I was like, whoa, was that Ben? No way. Went down a couple blocks. I was in a rush. There was lots of traffic. I was like, oh, I'll call him or text him. And then something said turn around, so I did, and turned around, rolled down my window, pulled up, was like, hey, what's up, Ben? And we started talking and ended up doing some really, really cool work together. He had just started a YouTube channel called Donut Media, which was amazing. I got to jump in on that a little bit, and that ended up selling to a private equity firm a few years later. It's just, again, there's a dozen of those things. I'm sure you've got them too, Mark, but you look back and you're like, wow, these little moments that turned into opportunities. And you can go out there and make those opportunities for yourself just by way of, making that phone call or sending that text or putting yourself in positions where those things can happen.
Definitely. I've had my fair share for sure of those. Yeah, for sure. And then let's talk a little bit about some of the projects you have now that you've been working on. I mean, this is an interesting one here.
Yeah. So this one on the left is kind of interesting. So this was an event that was held this summer in Riyadh. So turns out the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia loves video games. And so, so we got to collaborate with a group over there and create the brand identity for the for the Esports World Cup. And they created an organizing sort of body. So as like FIFA is to global football, or the ILC is to the Olympics, the Esports World Cup Foundation now is to the Esports World Cup, which is sort of the highest level of gaming. So we got to work with those guys and kind of create this brand for them this last summer, and that was awesome. We're doing a ton of work with FIFA, and at the moment we're working on Club World Cup for 2025. Also, the FIFA E brand we get to continue to work on and do some fun stuff with them. So it's just feel really fortunate again to work on not only fun big events, but things that I am super passionate about, and that we get to collaborate with these amazing, smart people, and do even jump in on YouTube channels every now and again. So,
Exactly. So with that, do you have any parting words especially with some of the students and some of the creatives here?
So unfortunately, my kids get to hear kind of stuff like this all the time, but I think one of the things, when I talk to students or, people who are trying to figure out kind of their path or whatever, a lot of times it feels like they have their eye on like the destination, and that's great. Like, oh, I want to do this job, or I want to work on the World Cup or whatever it is. And I would just say that those things are definitely possible, but it's the chances of someone calling you with the perfect job and the perfect location for the perfect pay, the perfect salary, and the perfect coworkers, the chances of that happening are pretty slim. So, when opportunities do come your way, if you can evaluate those opportunities, not only on what that job is, but what experience it might give you, what opportunities you might have to grow, and that you can leverage into your next thing, and just kind of keep that long game in mind. I feel like I've built my whole career on that, and feel really grateful that I've had those opportunities.
That's great. And with that, we're going to wrap up. And so let's give a big round of applause for Nate here.
Thank you, guys. That's it.